Governments around the world keep falling. France is in turmoil. Germany's chancellor just suffered the 6th no-confidence vote ever. Canada appears to be next. A no-confidence vote there is likely to topple the Trudeau government. What do they all have in common, apart from abrupt political turmoil? Each of those governments have been trying to sell the idea that the economy is just fine in each of those places. It's not fine. How many more examples do we need? Add them to the UK and the United States, where voters are demanding drastic changes in course. And that does not mean rate cuts. Think about it this way. The two central banks covering all three of these places, Canada, Germany, and France, those central banks right now are cutting rates the most out of all of their peers. Central banks reducing rates is the clearest sign whatever economy is in deep trouble. And the faster central banks are cutting, the more trouble you know there is. The Bank of Canada just did its second 50 in a row at the same time the ECB was flirting with one of its own, both of those just last week. The proximate reason why all these governments are failing is their out-of-control budgets. Yet even those are related to economic weakness too. They spend tons of other people's money expecting the economy to live up to their own hype, creating a rising stream of tax payments that would both justify the spending and rebalance those budgets. But that's not what happens. It's certainly not what happened. And now the wild card in every one of those is the labor market. Voters have been willing to put up with consumer prices and lost purchasing power on the condition there would be a way to get all of that back in the form of better wages and better job opportunities. Instead, as unemployment and joblessness rises in all of these places, that's where voters are drawing the line. As the global labor market continues to sour, voters are now looking for who to blame. That's why there's political turmoil, and it's the same reason why we're seeing, for example, interest rates continue to go lower. There are political consequences for a world that is unable to shake free from low growth. In fact, voters are upset because they're realizing that's the world they're being forced back into. Only now they're poorer for having gone through the supply shock. No wonder everyone is so pissed off. Instead of trying to polish a turd, saying economies are just fine, politicians that are in office should have heeded bond market signals the entire time, which all along had warned this wasn't going to be the epic recovery they had been promising from the very beginning. From Canada to Germany, like I mentioned yesterday's video, the correlation with Chinese bond yields that are absolutely plunging and swap spreads in US dollar terms. Markets have been betting that central banks would get out of the way, and now that they really are, we're seeing the consequences of it. And that's not restarted inflation. It's not a legitimate economic boom. It's anything but. It's the fact that the entire world lost out for the supply shock. Not was made better by government spending, out of control government spending that continues to this day. We were made worse off by the supply shock, and the government spending only temporarily disguised that fact. Now that the fact is being revealed as labor markets weaken and choke off that path to get back to purchasing power, people are upset, and understandably so. So it makes sense that the situation in Canada would become untenable. Just yesterday, according to CNBC, Canada's finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, quit on Monday after clashing with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on issues including how to handle possible U.S. tariffs, dealing a huge blow to an already unpopular government. In a stinging resignation letter, Freeland dismissed Trudeau's push for an increased spending as a political gimmick that could hurt Ottawa's ability to deal with the 25% import tariffs U.S. President-elect Donald Trump says he will impose. The government of Canada is itself spiraling out of control, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre told reporters, repeating calls for an immediate election. We cannot accept this kind of chaos, division, weakness, while we're staring down the barrel of a 25% tariff from our biggest trading partner. We simply cannot go on like this, Poilievre told reporters. The unemployment rate makes it completely unsurvivable. The economy is not living up to all of its hype. While they're all fighting over the budget, it's not really about the budget. It's about the economic circumstance. And the circumstances, Central banks are not going to bail out Trudeau or anyone else. Central banks are cutting rates because they're responding to the same thing that voters are. And by the way, if you want to know what Eurodollar University does, before we get into the rest of the political chaos that's enveloping the developed world, Eurodollar University offers subscriptions and memberships. The subscriptions, like the deep dive analysis, is your chance to go deeper into the money and macro world, far deeper than we get into here, where we cover all the same topics, but in much greater detail. Background, context, evidence, primary source material. So we go very deep into the weeds, into the explanations. We go back into the theory and revisit some of the settled quote-unquote science from economics that should be far from settled. We examine the details, the evidence, to draw conclusions that we hope are more representative of what things are doing, how reality is unfolding, the way the world actually works, to understand how it got to where it is and maybe where it's actually going. In addition to the deep dive analysis, Eurodollar University memberships. Memberships, there's a ton of material. All of it with the goal to get you to understand what the Eurodollar system is, from the very basics of what is money to the basics behind interest rate swaps. There's also presentations on particular aspects of the Eurodollar system, history, background. There's conversations, there's questions and answers, there's a weekly recap and a whole bunch more. There's a resource library. Tons of information available at Eurodollar University for either subscriptions, the deep dive analysis, daily briefing, or memberships. Background behind the Eurodollar system. What is the black hole? Well, the best chance to find out is through Eurodollar University. And we have a Christmas sale that's coming up where it gives you the best chance to get into the black hole. The best prices that we've offered on all of our products, including a bundle that gives you the deep dive analysis, including Eurodollar University AI, memberships, and the daily briefing, all for one very low price. Christmas sales coming up this weekend, so stay tuned to Eurodollar University's website for details on that. The article I just cited above from CNBC mentioned that the Trudeau government is deeply unpopular. But why is it deeply unpopular? And the answer is, as I've said this entire video and all along, the economy. It's not just the economy, though. It's the fact that incumbent governments will not be honest about it. They keep telling you everything's just fine. The situation here is absolutely booming. Why would anyone ever complain? In fact, this is literally the case in Canada, as the Toronto Sun pointed out just a couple months ago. As the unemployment rate was rising, Justin Trudeau is trying to convince Canadians the economy is great, and they've never had it so good. Unfortunately for Trudeau, no matter how many studies from world bodies he points to, Canadians can see the reality of their daily lives, that things are much different from how the Prime Minister paints them. All week in the House of Commons, the Trudeau Liberals were touting how great the economy is doing. Inflation is in the target range for 7 months in a row. Interest rates are down 3 times in a row, and the IMF says that we will have the strongest economic growth in the G7. That was according to recently resigned Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. And they can keep talking about all of these things, but unemployment in Canada is now near 7%, the highest it's been outside of 2020 since 2016. At the same time, GDP growth is getting weaker, and rate cuts are not going to do anything about this. Without a legitimate recovery, there is no way to get back the purchasing power. It's not about the rate of inflation. They keep talking about disinflation, meaning consumer price rates go back into their target range, which is not really a target because central banks never hit them. They're more at risk of undershooting than not. But this is the fundamental disagreement that people have with politicians. They talk about disinflation, and it's not what people expect. People expect disinflation to mean, okay, prices have ended, we've lost our purchasing power, now give us a way to get it back. All disinflation really means is that the consumer price outbreak from the supply shock is over. You don't need to tell people that. That's not what their major concern is. They've become impoverished, and they want some way to get it back. So consumer price rates, pointing to lower consumer price rates, you're talking a completely different language. People want to get back their purchasing power, and governments aren't even talking about that problem. Central banks aren't either. Instead, what people can sense, certainly in Canada, as the United States and elsewhere, is that as the labor market weakens, their chances of getting back that purchasing power diminish greatly. And so, like in the United States or the UK, they are indeed lashing out. In Canada, the Trudeau government truly is unpopular. So the fights that come down in the political angle, the political aspects about budgets aren't really about budgets either. It's the economy is not living up to the hype, what its expectations that were set by governments, and therefore those governments have to feel they have to continue spending because they're convinced that spending leads to the economic recovery that they've been promising, when it only leads the country further and further into the hole. And that's right where France is. France has been experiencing political upset all summer long. It went back to the European parliamentary elections back in June, when suddenly the French people expressed great dissatisfaction with the status quo in France. And the French president, Emmanuel Macron, decided he was going to take that as an opportunity to call a snap election, which I think he probably now regrets. Well, it was immediately thought of and characterized as a win for Macron because he was able to thwart what they all call the far right in France. It didn't really change the situation, nor has France's economic or fiscal situation improved since then. And this week it started out in less than ideal circumstances. The Bank of France cut its domestic growth outlook just days after President Emmanuel Macron named the country's fourth prime minister in a year, with the central bank citing the political upheaval as a drag on household and business confidence. And they got it backwards too. The political problems aren't causing the economy to be weak. The weak economy is the reason why there are political problems to begin with. They can't even put things in the right order in order to identify what's actually wrong. Some of that is actually intentional, as everyone really knows. The central bank in France now expects only a 0.9% expansion in 2025 instead of 1.2%, and they're going to cut it even more than it expected back in September. Bank officials also cut its 2026 forecast by 0.2% to 1.3%. France's deteriorating outlook adds to signals of the economic damage from a political crisis that began with snap elections in June and escalated this month to the collapse of the government and its plans to plug widening holes in public finances. And I said this is just backwards. Politics isn't making the economy bad. The bad economy is the reason for the political upheaval. And the worse the economy gets, the more upheaval there's going to be, because the government and anyone associated with it will continue to become more and more unpopular. And of course, on top of that, falling economic growth just makes the budget suffer that much more. And in France, the public's deficit is expected to hit 6.1% of GDP this year, compared to just 2.6% back in 2017 when Macron was taking office. So they expected to buy their way into sustained recovery when all they did was, along with the price illusion, cover up the lack of recovery for a certain amount of time. At the same time, the price illusion was really most people in small businesses becoming impoverished. It's all coming together and colliding at the same time. We look at France's economy. Again, it's the labor market that stands out. Payroll growth in the country stalled in the third quarter of last year, which sounds very familiar, which is not an accident. Same thing as in the United States, globally synchronized. And over the last couple months, France has seen a whopping increase in jobless benefits claims. September and October, the latest data that we have from France, huge increase in claims, the most that we've seen since the pandemic there. And that goes back to May and June. So we had a big jump in jobless benefits in May and June. Then they fell off a little bit in July and August, and then came back in September and October in a very big way. The labor market has turned since around March and April. Where have we heard that one before? They're blaming the labor situation on the political situation when, again, it's the other way around. Politics is downstream of economics, and economics is getting increasingly worse. At least everyone in Germany knows that. The economy there is among the most depressing you'll ever find. Some of it is political choice. It goes back a long way. But a lot of it is the fact that Germany is so dependent upon the rest of the world. And when there isn't a recovery around the rest of the world, including China, or starting with China, Germany is going to suffer the consequences for it, as it has. And now the political situation in Germany is catching up to the economic situation that has never gotten better this entire time. Even though Chancellor Olaf Scholz came into power promising that Germany would avoid a recession, it had already fallen into one and hasn't been able to get out the entire time. And if anything, the recent indications, like in France or Canada, are not encouraging, starting with unemployment. Along with Canada, Germany has the most concerning unemployment problem. So it's no surprise that the German government collapsed on Monday as Chancellor Olaf Scholz lost a confidence vote in Parliament, deepening a crisis of leadership across Europe at a time of mounting economic challenges. They also mentioned security challenges, but this all goes back to the economy. The campaign is likely to be dominated by several issues that have vexed Europe in recent years. Both Germany and France are mired in debates over how best to revive their struggling economies and do a couple of other things. All the recent data points to more recession, not escaping from the one that they've been in. In fact, they've been in a prolonged, protracted, shallow recession for a couple years, so you'd think that chances are on their side, when it's the exact opposite. The longer they go in this state, the worse it is. And of course, voters are looking to take it out on incumbents. They've been saying the economy is just fine all along when it has been anything but. They've been saying we're going to get out of it any moment. Recovery's just around the corner, only to experience one false dawn after another after another. So voters all over the world, not just in these three places, have been willing to put up with the supply shock, the price illusion, consumer prices soaring, lost purchasing power. They've been willing to bide their time and put up with all that, so long as that there was a plausible pathway to get it all back. And that's what's changed recently. That's what's changed this year. The weakness in the labor market is consumers, as voters, as workers, and business owners too, coming to the realization there is no plausible path forward. This economic weakness that governments are downplaying is more than just cyclical economic weakness. On the contrary, this is a profound development in the global economy that says downside of the supply shock means you all got impoverished and you better just get used to it. So that joblessness and slowing income growth only compounds those problems. And the fact that most people are not going to just get used to it. They are going to seek out someone who has, at least what they claim is, answers to these problems. It's not ideological, though that's what everyone will make it out to be. It's not even partisan. It's the economy, stupid. It's not about layoffs, at least not yet. It's about the lack of hiring. That's the cyclical aspect to this downturn in labor all over the world, and that's what we talked about in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Check out Eurodollar University and the Christmas sale coming up this weekend. Big thanks to Eurodollar University members and subscribers, and until next time, take care.